This is Christine Brown, and while I have to listen to this podcast as my motherly duty, you have the choice not to. My sons, and of course Michael, sometimes say some naughty things when they're trying to be funny, but really, they're just being stupid. You still want to listen? Go right ahead. I am not your mother.
All right, so this is, like we talked about, the super special episode. We finally got into our first Super Bowl of the Dynasty. And with us today, we have, no offense to our other guests, but probably our most famous guest, I would say, former Patriots linebacker and three-time Super Bowl champion, Matt Chatham. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on. This is fun, and I'm glad it worked out. This is quarantine time, so we've all got a lot of time on our hands.
Yes, we do. It's been okay so far, at least for me. I don't know how it's been for you, Matt, but it's actually starting to finally drag this past week.
Yeah, I think we're kind of reaching that point, right, where it's kind of the monotony of it all. I was having a blast with family time. We're having a great time getting closer and spending more time we otherwise wouldn't have. But I think we're running out of stuff to do. It's like you can only watch so many movies. You can only make so many different meals, and then it's like, okay, what else is out there?
Yeah, that's exactly.
There's a podcast where we rewatch every game from the Dynasty.
Well, there you go.
There
you go.
This podcast really worked.
It was the perfect timing for it.
Yeah.
If only we had planned it that way. But yeah, I thought it'd get easier once the weather got nicer, but now I just sit outside and do nothing instead of sitting inside and doing nothing. Just literally running out of shit to do.
There you go.
Yeah. So I wanted to get into the Super Bowl 36 in 2000, but first I want to kind of just touch a bit on you and your journey as a Patriot, because we've talked about this on our podcast kind of throughout this season, but you're kind of that true Belichickian success story of that, the kind of system that Belichick has put in place over these past 20 years of players a lot like yourself. And
I would put myself sort of in that group of that 2000 team. So I'll do my bio real quick.
Yeah.
I was actually a Ram initially. I was an undrafted free agent from the University of South Dakota. That's an FCS program for New England listeners. So we're similar to, it was Division II at the time. It's 1AA or FCS now, but that's comparable to like a UNH or Maine or UMass at the time or something like that. So it's that size school. I was an undrafted guy. I was like, sort of in that realm of preseason All-American heading into your senior season. Maybe a guy like that has a chance at the NFL, but you really kind of don't know. You're kind of just on the cusp of being really good at this level. What does that mean? Do I have a chance at the next? All that kind of stuff. And I went to my version of the Senior Bowl at FCS level. They have this, it no longer exists, but it was called the Snow Bowl back then.
Oh.
It was inside North Dakota State's. North Dakota State is, they've actually had, ESPN Game Day's gone there in the last couple of years, but
yeah, they're kind of a wagon, right?
It's
North Dakota
insane, man.
Yeah, because me and Greg both went to UNH, so we kind of have an idea of the.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, one.
Oh my Lord, North Dakota State, year after year after year. I mean, I've told this on many a medium, I guess, since I've been doing this stuff. But playing at North Dakota State is as cool of an environment as anything I ever saw in the NFL. It's smaller, obviously, but it's like an arena football game. It's like tight on top of you. It's wild. But anyway, so I went up to that Senior Bowl-ish kind of game for the small schools and performed pretty well, but I kind of jacked up my MCL. Came away with a little sprain, played through it, but in the sort of workouts after, I was not combine ready, and I was a combine alternate anyway at the time. So you really need the testing against bigger time guys and the exposure to bigger time players to sort of make that case. And I was able to do the bench, and I was able to do some of the stuff. They used to have a leg press thing, like a leg Cybex test like type thing.
Yeah.
That was part of combine testing, but there's only a few things I could do, and that hurts you. So then I go on, so I mean, I think that's part of the story. I go undrafted. I thought I was going to be a middle or late round guy, and then I don't get drafted. I'm offered a deal by the Rams, Colts, and Browns. Kind of just through my agent's guidance, choose the Rams in part because we thought that was the most vulnerability outside linebacker kind of thing, where maybe you could make a roster. And I was there in '99, and that was my rookie season. That's the year the Rams won the Super Bowl. And it's a really goofy story. Leonard Little was a really good player for them. The first round draft pick the year before in '98.
Yeah.
And Leonard had unfortunately gotten in that the deal with the drunk driving accident.
Oh yeah, we talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Leonard, and so that's my position. I think that was in part some of my agents thinking at the time about why that would be a great place to go. Looks like Leonard, their starter won't be there, kind of thing. So maybe the veteran moves into that spot. You can slide in and win a backup job. That's a great opportunity. But that off season in '99, it was announced that it was time served, and different times in 1999 than now. Obviously, if you were involved in an accident like that, you're probably going to miss a year, if not more. But back then, I think it had happened late in the season in '98, and he sat for those games, and then they made that decision later that summer. So it was a weird situation, not like Belichick type stuff, but they where he keeps it cryptic, and you never know where your standing is in the team. With the Rams, my position coach just came to me and was like, well, okay, Leonard's back, and he's a really huge part of what we do, and that means you're basically not going to probably make the team now. It's like, dude, it's like July. So we hadn't even gotten to preseason games yet. We'd had inter-squad stuff, I think, with Tennessee or something like that. But I pretty much learned before even getting to the preseason games that, hey, you're fighting for a practice squad job. And in my head, I'm like, that's bullshit. I could have gone to Cleveland. I could have gone to Indy. I could make a roster here. So I did a little petulant thing, I guess, in retrospect, and was like, all right, well, I'm not gonna go through these 2-a-days without an opportunity to actually make a team. So I left, which is weird. And so I went to Charlie Army, who was the GM at the time, and I had a pretty good relationship with Coach Vermeil. I mean, I think he liked me. That was one of the places, much like New England, that keeps a lot of undrafted guys. London Fletcher is one example, the Rams brag about how many undrafted guys they bring up, much like the Patriots do. They find a lot of those kinds of gems type idea. But I went to him and was like, man, I just want to play in the NFL, and it looks like there's no opportunity here. He says, oh, well, you can be on practice squad and eventually move up. And for a kid in '99, coming from small school, practice squad to me meant like hold a bag and be somebody else's dummy. And I was like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, 22-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that obviously is not really what it is in the practice squad world. I mean, I think in retrospect, after growing up a little bit, you realize that is sort of an on the cusp thing, and there are opportunities there. But I didn't see it that way as a young kid. So I went back to school. So in '99, I still was under full ride scholarship at USD, and I wanted to finish out my degree. Oh, cool. So I left camp, and they have a designation sort of where they kind of continue to hold your rights, like a futures contract kind of thing. And so '99, which would have been my rookie year, I went back to school. And so then, Charlie's calling in like November, and my agent's calling, and they're saying, okay, do you still want to do this? Yeah. And I'm like, hey, I do. And I graduated that fall. And then I came back the next off season in 2000 as if that were sort of my rookie season again. And then that's the year where I went all the way through camp and thought I made the roster for the Rams, got my playbook at the end of the fourth preseason game, and went through the weekend, stayed at a hotel and Holiday Inn in her city, and thought, hey, I made it. And we got to like Monday-ish, or maybe it was Sunday, sometime over that weekend, where I thought I'd made the cut. I came to the team meeting, had my new playbook for week one, and there was an injury at one of the receiver spots, and they came to me and said, hey, we're going to be a little thin. We're going to have to bring an extra wide receiver body in for week one. Basically, you must be number 53. That's kind of what I learned, I think, in that moment. Yeah. I made it, but I'm 53. I'm 53 on the 53. So they said, hey, we're gonna put you on practice squad for just the week. We're gonna have to release you right now. Just it's like a little transaction, hide you, bring you back when this thing's done. I was put on waivers, and Scott Pioli, here at New England, claimed me. So what I thought was just going to be a little, hey, it sucks you won't get to play in week one, but you're still be on the team thing. You're exposed to waivers. Anyone can get you. And Scott apparently had been an advocate of mine, have known more about me than I had no interaction with the team with New England prior to them doing that. But so I was claimed. So then all of a sudden I'm on a plane up here, and I played in week one with the Pats in 2000, Bill's first year. And I love Scott Pioli for all he did for my career, but it was a total surprise. So for me, and I know I spent a lot of time on that story, but the background there to what the Ram thing meant to me was kind of different. The fact that we ended up playing that particular team in 01 championship was cool for me, because my story had kind of started with them, never really got going. And it's no fault of their own. I mean, I think they were still, high on me, but the Patriots do this a lot too, where they'll expose the guy to waivers and hope to keep them on practice squad for a while and retain them. But the Rams tried to do that with me, and somebody else grabbed me. So I still kind of have a soft spot for that place. They were patient with me leaving them prior to camp and coming back, but it just didn't work out. And I ended up in this place, and oddly enough, that ended up being who we played the Super Bowl.
Wow. Yeah, because we tried to do some research on you before we did this, and none of that is in your Wikipedia, I have to say.
Yeah, thing needs to be updated.
Right,
yeah,
right.
I think I know what I'm doing this afternoon.
So what was like? Were you a fan of a team growing up then?
So when you live in Iowa, I don't know if it's not something I think you'd understand as a New Englander, because you got a team, right? You obviously have the Pats. You go far enough south, maybe you're far enough south into Connecticut, maybe you're a Giants fan or something. But if you live in this region, there's generally a team that is affiliated with you. Even if you're out as far as Western Mass. I mean, you're part of New England. Right. You had a team. If you live in Iowa, you don't have a team. You kind of Iowa is the Iowa Hawkeyes. I mean, Hayden Fry, that sort of storied college place. Much like Nebraska Cornhuskers, if you live in Nebraska, your pro team is your college team kind of thing. It's like an Alabama type idea. I was very much the same way. So there's a lot of my friends. I lived in Sioux City, Iowa. It's comparable size. It's just short of 100,000. It feels a little Worcesterish. It's a very blue collar town, comparable in size, I guess, to that. But so you have just a blend of people because you kind of sit in the middle. There are NFL fans, but some are Chiefs fans, some are Vikings fans, some are Bears fans, some are Packers fans. You get enough. Sioux City actually sits in 3 states. It's Iowa, South Dakota, and Nebraska, depending on what part of town you're in. And so the western portion, some of those people, because they sit in Nebraska, will be Broncos fans. So that's, again, another long-winded way to say you kind of don't have a team. Yeah, you kind of just cheer for who you cheer for, because we sit literally in the middle of maybe 4 or 5 markets, 6 hours in every direction. So I was a Raiders fan, which is kind of goofy, which has nothing to do with any of that. But I was a big, I like Howie Long quite a bit. He was a defensive lineman, stud guy that I just kind of dug his game. But I was a safety, number 42. Ronnie Lott wore that obviously for a while. And I kind of dug Ronnie. And I was a big, tall, skinny kid that played safety initially before I grew and became a linebacker. So, I was kind of a Raiders fan, which for me was neat, because my very first preseason game wasn't a regular season game, unfortunately. My first time where I got to wear an NFL uniform in game situation and go against another team, it was against the Raiders. My first preseason game there for the Rams. So that was cool. Tim Brown's out there running around the field, and you're just eyes are as big as saucers. That was a really, really cool day.
So you're the second Raiders fan we've had on, and neither of them are from either Oakland or LA. The other one we had on, he got into the Raiders through hip hop, actually.
Yeah, they got a brand through that.
Yeah.
So what's your?
I would say like starter jackets, guys, like the satin jackets. And
love the starter jackets.
All through like that. I'm a 80s kid and early 90s and high school and all that. So Raiders were like one of those brands that, Raiders, the Bulls were kind of that way too. Just like these are huge 80s, 90s brands that if you didn't have an affiliation, you probably were cheering for one of those just by default.
Yeah, I think that was the Cowboys for me growing up.
Cowboys for you? Okay.
I was a little behind you.
Okay.
But, so the Cowboys were the team you rooted for if you didn't watch football, I think.
Right. Right.
So what was your connection to the Steelers, since you clearly just went on like a revenge tour in 2001?
Yeah, right. No Steelers love whatsoever. Yeah, I don't. You know what? I would say this though: when you're like a kid from non-NFL world, like if you're here locally, you can grow up in Framingham, you can grow up in Dorchester or whatever. Or you're a Franklin kid or whatever. You're from some small area here. You can maybe, even if it's just once a year, once every 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or whatever it is, you can go to Schaefer Stadium or Patriot Stadium or whatever. Sullivan's. You can have sort of brushes with NFL life. You can go to an NFL stadium, you can drive by an NFL stadium, so you're around it, at least you're aware of it. I out there, like just even the sight of those iconic helmets like give you like goosebumps. Like you walk on the field and it's just that, the old steel curtain look, And it's just so cool when you're, those are the things I've only seen on TV. And I never had been to an NFL game in my life until I played in one.
Whoa.
So so when I had gone up through college at the University of South Dakota, we have a school in our conference back then. The conference doesn't exist anymore, but it's called the NCC. So that was North Dakota State, South Dakota State, South Dakota State, all those schools. Northern Colorado was in there, and Mankato, a lot of good hockey schools. St. Cloud State's a pretty good hockey program.
Yep.
And Minnesota Mankato, I think they're actually called Minnesota State now, but Mankato State had a team in our conference. I was a school in our conference, and they host the Vikings training camps and have for years and years and years. And one time a year, they get to play a home game in what used to be the Metrodome. So that was my one little brush with. I got to play a road game against Mankato in the Metrodome, but it sucked because they're, the Metrodome's huge, and there were like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 fans in the stand, so it just was like trickling down the front row kind of deal. Terrible environment.
So it looks like a Revs game.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've been to Revolutions games that like it.
It's that feel. So my whole point of bringing that up is just when you are a kid like me, without really any NFL sort of brushes, you see a Steelers helmet across me, you see a Raiders helmet across me, you see a Niners helmet, a Packers helmet. I mean, those things it gives you the goosebumps. It's just such a cool thing, even if you didn't necessarily cheer for one of them or cheer against.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Did you have like a favorite away stadium to go to?
So this is a corny as hell kind of story, but I still laugh about it because it was my one moment. So I played. I don't think I got to go to Lambeau, where the Packers are at, until well into my career. I think I played there, ended up playing there a few times, maybe once or twice with the Jets. Once, I think maybe just once with the Patriots. I was with the Patriots for 6 years, and I feel like maybe we had one trip there in the 6, maybe none. I know we played the Packers at home, but I hadn't been there a lot. So I feel like, I'd been in the NFL for a handful of years by then, 4, 5, 6 years, something like that. And I think it was my first trip to Green Bay. And I think the first one was actually a preseason game. Then we came back and played there later in the regular season. I think that's correct. But anyway, it was my first time in Lambeau, right? And that's kind of like a big deal, again, to like a football fan, because even if if you're ambivalent with the Packers thing, cheer for them, not cheer for them, still just being in Lambeau is kind of, it's like a Fenway kind of thing for baseball. So I just remember, this is corny as hell, but back in the early days, I'll give Tom Brady credit for this. Brady was one of the very first guys that I knew. Actually, our strength coach, Mike Wojcik, and Tom were the two sort of forefront guys on this that had iTunes libraries on their laptops. This is before even like the iPod stuff got started, but Tom had like iTunes library really, really early. He'd always be on his Apple, and this is before Apple computers were really cool or new or whatever. This was kind of just like the early days of Apple, and Tom would be up at like ungodly hours downloading songs and making these playlists. And this is during the 2000 season. And this is like right when like iPod I think came out. The iPod, the handheld thing, came out like after the 2000 season. I think it was like the 2001 off season. Yeah, that's
and
anyway, so yeah, somewhere in that range. And I had like an extensive CD collection and cassettes and all that kind of stuff. So we were all trying to download shit to our laptops and make these playlists. But Tom was like an assassin with his stuff. Like, he was so into it, and I was like, okay, I already have my CDs. I don't get this, Tom. I don't really understand what you're doing with these digital.
I have my vinyls, Tom.
I have my vinyls. What are you doing? So anyway, he was like really, really into that, and I was a little late to the game. But part of the incentive to get it on your iPod was because we had one of those attachments, like a little adapter that would allow you to plug it into the weight room. So the Patriots weight room, if you could get your own playlist in there, you could sort of control the thing. And it's not because obviously Tom had seniority at any time like that. He was just a guy who had a playlist, and everyone else is fucking popping in a cassette tape or something, right? So he did that, and it kind of incentivized a lot of us to go out and like figure this shit out. So we went and bought iPods. I started to make my own stuff, and ungodly amount of hours he'd spend where I remember, what is that? Ghetto Boys. Damn, it feels good to be a gangster. I remember downloading that song overnight. My office was like upstairs in the loft, and it would it was downloading the song, and from the time I went to bed, it took till morning to download like that single song on like Napster or whatever.
Oh,
it
yeah.
was, and it would play.
And you better hope it was the right song and not just the file that was
Exactly.
named that way. Oh yeah,
Exactly.
This is the closest I've ever felt
And
to
it-
Tom Brady in my life, I have to say.
And it would just play like, you know, like I'd be sitting there and half asleep at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, whatever, and it would pop on. And like the song's partially downloaded, and it would start playing, and you wake up like, what the fuck is it there? But anyway, so I had this, like, I'd gotten to the point where I had, you know, had a pretty robust library and had my pregame playlist exactly as I wanted. It was still on that first or second sort of generation iPod, and I had it with me, and I always took it out to pregame warmups. And we were now in Green Bay for this first time that I've ever been to Lambeau, and Lambeau's the walkway from the locker room to the field is unusually long. Like Denver's a little bit that way in the new stadium in Invesco, but most of them, you know, you're 50 yards, maybe 100 yards. You know, you're close. Lambeau has this weird like tunnel. The tunnel's really long and really steep, but then it kind of winds back through sort of the underbelly of the stadium. So it takes like it's a long walk, and you're going through these sort of hallowed halls kind of feel. And I just remember, back at the time, I just had my iPod on shuffle. So no particular playlist ready to roll. It's just so every one of the 800-ish songs or whatever could possibly pop up at any moment. And I had hit play, and I started walking down this like windy thing. I don't remember exactly what song was on, but as I hit that, as I'm walking anyway, but as I come down that final tunnel stretch and I pop right out the tunnel, you look and you see the field for the first time. Looks Like We Made It pops on. That who sings that? That looks like we made it. Who the hell sings that?
God.
It's corny as hell. You know, like 70s.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I built the whole story up, and I can't think of his name. but that was kind of my like, oh, you know, like the Angels, whatever. Kind of looks like we made it, and I'm walking out in the Lambeau, and just I will always remember that. I just get a kick out of that and chuckle every time I think of it, because the way the song timed up right as I hit this iconic sort of football venue.
Barry Manilow.
There you go. Barry Manilow. There
Nice
it is.
fact check,
Cool.
Steve.
Yeah, we'll dub that into this.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Post recording.
Perfect. Yeah, over my singing. Yeah, please.
So you mentioned South Dakota State. They were a rival of yours at the time. Is that right?
Yep. So Vinatieri is a few years older than me. I think he was a senior when I was a freshman, I believe, or either senior, sophomore, something like that. He's a couple years out ahead of me, and that's our rival. Yeah. So South Dakota State. Another guy you may or may not know. This is going to take some hardcore NFL fan this, but Steve Hayden was a tight end for the Browns. Played about the same amount of years as I did, somewhere in that 8-9ish range, something like that.
I recognize the name.
Steve was alongside Kellen Winslow when he was there. So Winslow, Jr., whatever his name. Yeah. He was Winslow and Hayden were their two tight end sets, and Hayden and I are the exact same age. So he was at State all 4 years that I was at U, and so he's an NFL prospect. I'm an NFL prospect, and we played against each other all four. So we've had surprisingly so. There was another running back, James White. James, oh my God, I just did that.
I was gonna say, I've heard of him.
I've heard of him. Why can't I literally cannot think of the back's name. Holy shit, this is terrible of me. USD had another running back that was small, kind of like James body type. So they're very, very similar that way. But anyway, oh gosh, it's so bad. I mean, to go on air and not know this. But we had a running back that was really, really good that went to South Dakota, from South Dakota, that went to the Browns also around that time. And once again, this, I'm sure that'll come to me later. But the point was, we have a handful of NFL guys come through there. There's some brushes with South Dakota.
But you didn't have any beef with Adam when you were on the Pats?
Not really. I mean, I kind of give him a hard time now. He's a kicker, so I don't think he really get real into the whole like rivalry stuff. He just does his job, does it exceptionally well, obviously. But I give him some shit. So 2 years, I call games for ESPN. Generally, I'm up here doing, maybe it used to be UMass games, then BC, then Syracuse, UConn. I kind of stay regional. I don't travel much because of NFL obligations. But generally, I'm doing games up in this Northeast. And then when it comes playoff times, I'll end up doing a UNH game, Maine, go down to James Madison, things like that. But we had 2 years ago, South Dakota State actually advanced to, I believe it was the Final Four of the FCS playoff sort of bracket. And or maybe it was still just the Final 8 stage when I had this particular game. But anyway, they were down at a school called Kennesaw State, which is in Atlanta. And Kennesaw State has like a newish, like 2, 3, 4-year-old stadium. It's like one of those built a venue just for soccer. So they have like a minor league soccer team where they build those really cool sort of low sitting, but like, brand new with like eating decks right on top of the seats. It's really cool little stadium. But South Dakota State was actually their opponent. And for all these years where I do the BCS stuff through the regular year, but then when bowl season starts, I don't do bowls, I do the playoff games. So I get into, I'm always wanting these assignments where, give me South Dakota State or give me North Dakota State, schools I used to do, and they never give them to me. I always keep me with the Northeast stuff. So I got a South Dakota State assignment. So I was really fired up about it. So I was texting Adam and like, oh, I'm going to talk so much shit on the air. Like, I was just going to do the bias call in the history of ESPN. But no, I actually held my tongue. And the head coach there now is the same guy that was there when I was the head coach of South Dakota State, the same guy as when I was there years and years ago. And we have to do the coaches conference during the week. And so we did the coaches call with the other broadcasters and the ESPN crew and stuff. And I got on and I kind of just bit my tongue and didn't say a whole lot. And he came on and gave a little spiel, and he said, "Hello, Matt." Oh yeah, of course I remember you, Matt. We kind of had a little coyote and jackrabbit back and forth, but then we had to dive into it. So I knew I'd sort of been put on notice that like, okay, I gotta call this straight.
I mean, Zolak does that every Sunday, right?
Yeah. So it was fun though. I went backstage. So like behind sort of the scenes, they always have a production room where food's available for crew and staff before any game really at the NFL or college level. But I went down to sort of the officials room and where all the food was being served. And I was going to grab a few plates and take it back up to the booth. And in the hallway is this whole crew of the South Dakota State cheerleaders. So there's, 15 of these young girls and they're like blue and yellow stuff. And I'm like, these girls are young as shit. I'm in my early 40s. They're not going to have any idea who I am. So I'm just going to ask them to take a picture and they'll recognize me with my little ESPN garb or whatever being down here that, it just must be one of the broadcasters or some random dude. So I asked them to take a picture and they all got around me and kind of arms around everyone. And we're all going to smile. And I said, on 3, 1, 2, 3, go Yotes. Now Yotes is the South Dakota thing. Yeah. So none of them, I had our producer or whatever taking the photo. One of the guys was down there with me, and I got them all to 1, 2, 3, go Yotes, and they were that, and they all kind of gave me the funny look, and it snapped, and then I sent it back to Adam, and had some fun with that. But unfortunately, once the game got going, I'm being facetious, obviously. I called a straight game. I would almost be accused of maybe being too complimentary for State on that.
That's how it happens.
It does.
We have no love lost for South Dakota State either because they beat the crap out of you.
Oh, really? Okay.
Back in 2017.
Jackrabbits, yeah.
Well, their nose off.
Yeah. That was the big thing. I think they've outlawed that now. They don't allow us to do it, but there was always a dead rabbit every time the schools play because we're the Coyotes. Emphasis on Coyotes. It's not Coyote. That's sacrilegious to say that. That's not the correct pronunciation. So it's Coyotes, not Coyote. But anyway, those that were actually, it's like a natural predator kind of situation with coyotes and rabbits. So any one of those games, there's always a dead jackrabbit. And they're really big. It's not like your regular bunny. It's like a large jackrabbit thrown on the field. Thrown on the court whenever we'd have any kind of thing. But I think they got in some trouble for that, and probably an animal rights thing or something.
Yeah, it makes sense. I just made the realization that Yote in your Twitter bio is coyote. Yeah. I was going to ask you about it, and I Googled it.
No, that's it.
And it said it was the past tense of yeet. And I was like, I don't think Matt Chatham is putting a past tense yeet.
No, that's not it. No, and I'm so proud of my school. I feel like I grew up at the wrong time. Obviously, the Patriots stuff worked out swimmingly as far as timing there, but USD right now is, like I said, it's an FCS school, so it's comparable in size to the schools we mentioned out here. But we have a dome that's called the Dakota Dome, and very similar. Gosh, they don't really build them out here in the Northeast. The Metrodome was a bigger version of this back in that day. The Silverdome in Detroit, all these kind of 80s, 90s, more 80s, 70s, 80s builds have kind of come and gone. But the Dakota Dome is still there. They put a solid ceiling over the top of it now, so it's not the old bubble top.
Oh, yeah.
But they're putting solid seating on both sides. So anyone who's bored, listen to this podcast. We got all this time on our hands. When you jump off here and go to I think it's like Coyote, I don't know, USD's website, whatever that is, University of South Dakota's website. They've got like this stadium progression thing right now. They're putting solid seating on both sides. So now you've got this like 20,000 seat, gorgeous, packed to the gills FCS program that looks like nothing in the country. Yeah. And I'm just like, gosh, I want to go. Can I go back to school? It's sick. I mean, you're obviously familiar with UNH. You know what that venue's like. It's nice since they updated
it's not
the
the
stadium
same
a little bit.
But yeah.
No, it's not the same. And Maine is solid enough, but it's it's just the big metal stands kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
You see this venue and you're like, holy shit, that's an FCS school. I mean, I do BC games, regularly throughout these years, and that's Alumni Stadium, but it's it's a 40-ish thousand seat aluminum stands kind of thing. It's pretty basic. This is sick. Go, oh my god!
I got it up on Google right now. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And it's supposed to be ready for the season, but I don't know if it's going to be ready or not with all this stuff going on.
I don't know if the season's going to be ready. Yeah.
Right. True.
So you played when they built the new stadium as well for the Pats. What was that like?
So
locker rooms and all that.
Yeah, I think I had 2 seasons, obviously, at the old place. So again, with the contrast of the Rams stuff, I started that first, my first out of South Dakota thing, and you're in a Division II school at the time, so. The facilities are nothing like the NFL. So I'm all excited to go. I'm going to the NFL. It's first class. And the Rams were in this place called, their training facilities in Earth City. So Earth City is like this gorgeous, full training facility out in the burbs kind of thing. So glass facility, racquetball courts, indoor field, basketball court. It's just gorgeous. Meeting rooms are sick. Like everything's really nice, first class. The field looks like a golf course. Like it's just like nothing I've ever seen in my life. And I'm like, that's the NFL. That's what it's supposed to be like, I guess. Yeah. Right. And then, the dome is downtown, the TWA dome. And those are like the facilities that like, I've made it. I'm in the NFL. Yay. This is what it's supposed to be like. And then when I got released and you're shuffled off here, and I stayed out at the Westin at the airport. So, they fly into Logan, stay overnight at this really nice Westin next to it's not a Westin anymore. I think it's Hilton now. But anyway, the one right next to the airport. Oh, so it's like, okay, I'm in downtown Boston. This is cool. And this is a badass hotel. This is nice. Okay. Drive down 93 to 95.
I know where this is going,
yeah. We all do.
Exactly. And then I get out and I'm like, wait, that? Like, old Patriot Stadium. And it's like, it's kind of a college bowl. So that's big. It's still big and that's cool and everything. And then instead of staying any more nights in the nice Westin, we're put up in the end zone motel across the street from the stadium. And God bless, we had some really good times there. The owners are really nice people at the time. I think that's changed ownership, but it's a shithole. I mean, it's not like a really nice place, but we had a party scene kind of motel, but it did not have an NFL feel to it.
No.
But then the stadium itself, like you go into our meeting rooms where, like the chairs that have the desk that kind of folds, like a folding chair with a folding arm thing to write on. Like that's, with partitions, like you would have at, some office complex kind of thing. Like the rooms weren't really divided. We had like the standing rolling partitions and seats that roll up. And like, it was like, I'm like, holy shit, this is the NFL. Like, and for me, I would say the facilities weren't that much better than what I knew at South Dakota. So
I was just going to ask.
What is this? But yeah. So there's two good years of that though, and it was still cool on game day. The stadium from the field looks pretty sweet, but the facilities aren't nearly as nice. But then when they built the new thing, it was called CMGI Stadium. Before the Gillette, you remember that Gillette flip. But I have a box somewhere with a bunch of CMGI logoed stuff because that announced launch. Their CMGI was written all over everything.
They were like the
plates,
the like Yahoo of the Northeast at the time, I think. Like they were
something
a big deal,
that.
And then they went under in the .com bubble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So did
exactly.
you do training camp at Bryant, or was it at Foxborough?
Yeah, I think I did 2 training camps at Bryant, maybe 3. At one point, Coach Belichick flipped it to up here, and we started staying at an extended stay, or what are those called, like the residence inn or something that over in Foxborough, so that we could, so instead of on college, we were staying back here in the woods in Foxborough, and then we'd come over here and do it at the stadium. But yeah, we were, I think we got maybe 3 or 4 camps here at the stadium, and it's absolute night and day. I mean, one quick story from that, so when I grew up out in South Dakota, going to school at the University of South Dakota, I grew up in Iowa, but at USD, we actually had 2 coaches. I had this coach, Walt Hausman. House, we call him. House is a rock star legend. He's I don't know if you remember, a few years ago they had the LA Kiss, the team that was owned by the band Kiss, and they had a reality show on one of those TLC or something like that.
Nope, haven't seen that.
Anyway,
is it on Netflix? Because I'm looking for shit to watch right now.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's one of those ones you can find online, but it was one of those reality shows that follows an arena team around, and the whole joke, it was like Gene Simmons owns a football team, and it was. Anyway, it was crazy. But House was the defensive coordinator for that team, and he's my old coach from way back when. But House is from New Hampshire, so House has got the accent, not hardcore East Boston, but like still a New England. It's going to sound very New England to a South Dakota kid. Yep. So House is, a South Dakota guy, and we had this other guy that was a strength coach, and he was from out here and had much more of a, very, very heavy Boston accent kind of thing. And so that strength coach was, I'll get into the story quickly. So I'm at training camp at Bryant, like you'd mentioned. I'm out there on the field in 2000, head spinning, it couldn't have been 2000. I'm sorry, it had to be 2001 because I missed training camp in 2000 because I was in St. Louis. So my first Bryant training camp, 01, I guess. So I'm out there on the field, and the way it always works is you only do autographs. They kind of still do this now. You only do autographs with by position group. So they don't let, today's running backs, today's linebackers, today's tight ends, today's quarterbacks, whatever it is. So when you're walking off the field, coach would encourage you. It's like, if it's not your day, don't go over and do it, because then everyone will be expected to dive in. So they did it sort of in sequences. So it was one of those days where I knew our group wasn't supposed to go over there. So when it was our time to go, we just had to walk off the field. But, a lot of people yell out to you and want you to come stop and sign something. And this guy is yelling. And again, I'm some, young guy. I'm not the guy people are pining for my autograph, right? But for some reason, there's this guy who'd had his shirt off, huge guy, shirt off the entire time, I don't know, Ray-Bans or whatever. He's just screaming my name throughout the practice. Big barrel-chested guy.
He's hammered.
Chatham. Yeah, probably. Chatham. Like, he's trying to get my attention the entire time. All the linebackers are busting my balls. Like, who the fuck is that just won't stop saying her name? And then when we went by, I may have I don't know if I waved or acknowledged, but I certainly didn't stop because we were told not to. Just, I'm doing what I'm told. It's not our day. We can't stop the sign. Well, anyway, that guy was Tom Jenkins, who was my strength coach at USD. Now, I had no clue that was him. And so this is before, I guess I probably had an email. So I'm getting a text message months later about, why did you punk me in front of all my friends, and why did you not acknowledge me? And I'm like, what? What? Oh, Jenks, my bad, dude. So anyway, that was like that if you can imagine that voice in South Dakota. We had 2 hardcore New Englanders throughout my 4 years. So it was always a little piece of that in my life, even before I knew really what this was all about out here.
He should have tweeted at you with like a big chunk of meat or something.
right. Yeah, but again, this is pre-social media. Oh, yeah. I maybe had a cell phone. Yeah, I probably had a cell phone in 01. Yeah, I probably right towards the end of college. I think midway through college in 97 or 8. I think I got my first big chunky cell phone. But it's not like you didn't text people really that much then. And maybe it was an email, but I don't fucking know. I think my wife and I shared an email when I first went to the NFL. So it's how do you get a hold of one another back then, at least.
Yeah, it baffles me how we managed to do it. Get by with landlines and shit back then.
Right.
Hey, by the way, I'm looking up this LA Kiss, and their jerseys are outrageous.
Outrageous, yeah.
It's exactly what you'd expect if someone from Kiss designed a uniform.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and Walt Hausman's his name. House is a stud. He was a really good offensive lineman, I believe, at Iowa. That went on to play for a couple years in the NFL, but his knees got really jacked up. But House was, you know how reality shows are. Like, they always try to hone in on a few of the big personality guys. And House is just wild, the screamer, the just good dude. All the players love him. Probably has a dip in at all times. Big cat lover. Like, he's a very eccentric guy. One of my favorite coaches of all time. Really smart football guy. But House was like this. You know, I'm coming from some Division II school. And, 15, 20 years later, there's this reality show with my old defensive coordinator on there. And it's like, oh, well, you guys are getting to see what I got to see. This is hilarious.
Oh, he is from New Hampshire. We're from New Hampshire as well, originally. He's from Merrimack.
Walt's New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Merrimack.
Yep, there you go.
Wow.
He coached at St. Anselm College, which is literally 5 minutes down the street from me.
Yeah, I believe House is retired now, but just a great guy. Good dude. Coached all throughout Arena and then small college stuff with us. And man, I love it. He used to actually come up to Patriots camp. And when, the Arena is obviously Arena football is trying to pick at guys that look like may not make a roster, like there's something to them that can still play. They're good players, but they're going to get snipped on 53 and they might be part of that next 10. So he was always up here in those later years evaluating, trying to, hey, Chatham, who's not going to make it, but do you like? I love that stuff. It's great.
It's like Kurt Warner, right? He's an Iowa guy too, isn't he? Did you interact with him when you were at the Rams for that little bit?
Very little. So remember 99's that off season when the ACL gets blown out,
right.
Trent Green's ACL gets blown out. And so by my little story earlier about how when I left camp, I left camp the week of the first preseason game. So this announcement had come right around that time, had the little meeting. I went through a practice or two after they told me that. And I stood there for the entire 2.5 hours just watching, and I was furious. Like I said, the whole emotional reaction thing. But anyhow, so I didn't actually see it was Rodney too. I think it was Rodney Harrison who went through Trent's knee.
That's right.
In that preseason game. Yeah. But that happened, I believe, a week or two into preseason, maybe the third week, something like that. So I missed that part. So in fairness, the time when I was there, Kurt was just, backup quarterback, and my draft class, I was one of the undrafted guys, but Joe Germain was in that group. You remember him from Ohio State?
Yep.
Joe Germain was the other. Could he be the second? Could he be the third? So at the time I left, I really, it wasn't the Kurt Warner story yet. So had a few interactions with him, but not a ton. But obviously a super decent guy. But I didn't get to see him be the kind of player he became until I was finished.
Yeah, he was the second best undrafted Iowa.
Yeah, but that was another school. He went to the University of Northern Iowa, and that's another school sort of in the FCS, same conference as USD now. So that's a competitor, but cool school. I went to there for a recruiting trip, and it was one of my coolest memories. There was you remember Offspring? You remember the band Offspring from
my first ever CD?
Ixnay on the Ombre. Yeah.
So I'm blanking on that one song. I'm terrible about bringing up song names, but here not remembering the name. But I remember on that recruiting trip, it was one of those almost like Johnny Be Good, that old movie, like one of the sickest recruiting trips I ever remember. You go into this house party after we'd left the game, and they had actually opened the back door and then opened the front door, and they ran a slip and slide all throughout the home, and they had kegs at one side where they had opened the tap of the keg and were letting that run down the slip and slide. So whatever that song was from Offspring, that I'm blanking on it. It was their hit early on there in the
Keeping Separated, maybe
mid-90s. Yeah, no, not Keeping Separated. You'd hear it.
You're gonna do
whatever it is. We'll come up with it. But they killed the lights in the house, And they started playing that song, and there's, like 200 people in this old house, and they flip on the kegs, running down the slip and slide out from the back door, out the front door of the home, and people running through the backyard and sliding through at the front of the house while that Offspring song plays. That's how I remember Northern Iowa.
I'm pretty sure that's how Greg's Easter just went too.
Just by myself.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, all right. Well, I mean, we've kept you longer than we told you we would. Boys, do you have any last questions you wanted to ask Matt before we mercifully let him go?
I mean, I'm a little interested in like the build up to the Super Bowl, like that Super Bowl media week and the extra.
We didn't actually
focus and
talk
all
about the
that.
Super Bowl, did we?
Oh yeah, sorry, we didn't get that part. That's fine.
That's all right.
I had all the time in the world. Unfortunately, I do have all the time in the world right now, I think. But so I'll just say this: it was weird, especially getting to experience the next two, and the pace of the week. Based on the one we had Houston and Jacksonville, those next couple, that's kind of what it's supposed to feel like. But you'll remember, the Rams had an incredible advantage, I would say, not incredible, but a nice one, because they won at home against the Eagles to go to the Super Bowl.
Yep.
We won on the road against the Steelers, and you'll remember this is the 9/11 year, so
Yeah.
we'd lost a week. We've lost a week of the season where the NFL paused things during the year, and when we lost that week, basically what was chewed up was that extra week of the Super Bowl. So there wasn't 2 weeks; there's just one. So when you went on the road against the Steelers, I want to say the AFC game was the afternoon game. I believe it was, on that Sunday.
Yeah.
So we're clinching early evening, and we're having our trophy party there on the field, and then we got to hop on a plane and fly back to Foxborough, and then go to New Orleans the next day. So
Jesus.
if you're St. Louis, you beat Philly, you're at least home. And then the guys all go back to their houses, grab their bags, and you probably meet the next morning. You take off on a flight for New Orleans. We had to fly back. So we had to fly back in the middle of the night. Obviously the drinks are flowing. We're having a blast. You're making it to the Super Bowl work, but we have to, late night flight from Pittsburgh back to New England, but everyone's got to be back the next morning with their bags packed at the stadium. And ops is, the guys that work on operations for the team are trying to put together a Super Bowl plan on the fly. But I just remember being, maybe you sleep a little on the plane or maybe not, but you're arriving back in the middle of the morning. You got to go home, pack a bag for an entire week stay in New Orleans, and you're back at the stadium, maybe at noon. I don't remember exactly the times, obviously, but something like that. Like the flip is so quick. And now you've got your bags packed for a week. Coach Belichick's coming in with his itinerary that they've probably put together on the flight, I guess. I don't know when one would have time for all that, and then we're turning around and jumping on the jet and going to New Orleans. So it was quick. It was a whirlwind. You did not really have an opportunity to let it all sink in. But then that evening, I think Monday night, I would imagine we touched down maybe sometime that afternoon or something like that. We went, there was a group of 10, 12 of us, something like that. Emerald Lagasse has this restaurant called NOLA, and was hosting a handful of us. And so we ate at Emerald's place, and he kind of hosted dinner. It was really cool. Again, you're kind of like celebrity eyes, kind of like just head spinning, like getting to do all these cool things. But we went there to NOLA's real quick, had a really great dinner that night with a handful of guys. And then we're down to Bourbon Street for kind of our one night out, because it's the one night where you don't have a curfew or whatever, and you kind of just let loose. And a bunch of the Rams guys are down there as well. I think Larry Flint, I know this is obviously not a highbrow place, but Larry Flint has one of those sort of balcony hangover Bourbon Street kind of places for beads and all that stuff. So a bunch of those guys were in there, which some of my old friends from St. Louis, and then a bunch of us after leaving NOLA's went up there, and we kind of hung out a little bit. It was kind of weird. The two teams are kind of interacting down on Bourbon Street the night before it all gets going. But it was that quick, though, that you just basically arrived there after, it was 24 hours from, we're sitting at dinner at NOLA's 24 hours from when we were in the stadium in Pittsburgh the day before, right?
That's great.
And after having gone back to New England and back again. And then you have your wild night out there, got pretty popped, and then the next morning you're doing media day. So that whole in the stadium pictures, it was that fucking quick. So that's what Tuesday was, and then you're into Wednesday practice week. So all I remember I don't remember a lot of the details other than just like little anecdotes like that, because it happened so freaking fast. So that was one of the ones where I'll remember stories like individual things that we did in Houston or in Jacksonville way better than New Orleans. New Orleans was like whoa, that came quick. Like it just, you're into a game plan like basically the very next day, and just trying to get up to speed really quickly and play a game.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't give you a lot of time to study that Rams walkthrough tape either, while their practices.
Exactly.
Steve.
It's almost as if that didn't happen. It didn't.
I read that article on The Athletic that you wrote about that, so I was like, we got to bring that up.
Yeah, it drove me nuts, especially since I have a lot of respect, independent of that one situation, with a lot of those guys in St. Louis that bought into it. And I don't know why they did, but I can understand that when when you've had disappointment and loss, that you would want to believe that something like that was at the heart of it, but it's just not true. So, and that's a crazy thing. Like, we just, it was such a quick week. And I think one of the things that when people wanted to find a way of how are we so good on defense, we must have known something. We must have had some secret blah, blah, blah. Like, it was so incredibly helpful for us to have played them really tight and lost at that, remember that home game that we had with them in November, December, what it was with the Rams.
Mm-hmm.
That was so helpful to kind of flesh through what really worked for us, that we could now build a game plan around. And also look at, all the times the Rams have been just smoking people and allowing their receivers and backs and tight ends to just run off the line untouched. That was, to me, one of the first real hardcore Belichick game plans that was, really what won it for us. If we'd adopted a different game plan and we had done something comparable to what you'd seen all the other teams that had tried to slow them down do, we probably got beat, but it took a very particular approach to beat those guys. And coach taught it to us again in this sort of expedited manner because it was such a quick week, but it was like, you can't learn everything in this environment. You just can learn here quickly what you can't do. They can't free release off the line. Ernie Conwell, stud, big blocking tight end, but very athletic. And Williams, the other tight end, they've got really good athletic tight ends, and all those receiver groups from Isaac Bruce to my draft class or my rookie class, Torrey Holt, and Horn. I think Horn was still there. Blanking on the other third receiver's name, but Ricky Prohl. Well, obviously Paul. Yeah, obviously Marshall and Ricky Prohl, and it's just an incredibly talented group. If you let them build on you and get easy releases off the line and make their break at 12 to 15 yards, they're going to murder you. But if you beat them up at the line, that's, I don't know. It was one of the first times where I think approach won a game that I'm aware of. I mean, I'm not a big NFL historian guy, but it was just how incredibly important the approach that we adopted, played that role in the outcome.
Well, I mean, it was similar to Belichick's game plan against the Bills when he was the defensive coordinator for the Giants too.
I think that's
he basically told them that they wanted Thurman Thomas to run for 100 yards, and if he did, they would win the game, sort of thing. It had shades of that, at least.
Shades of that. There you go.
Yeah, to me anyway. I don't know. I wasn't there.
Do you have any guys you played with that you still keep in touch with? Do you have any really close friends on the team?
We're talking Patriot stuff.
Patriots, Jets, anywhere around the line.
Patriots, yeah. So I would say the group of guys that stays in touch the most is really your position group. So Larry Izzo is one of my good buddies, and Iz and I were obviously together here for 5 of those 6 years, and Iz has gone on to do a lot of different things in coaching. He was a special teams assistant for the Giants for several years before he got his first coordinator job with the Texans, had that for a few seasons, and now he's the assistant up in Seattle. And it does kind of suck having, one of your boys that you were tightest with live on the other side of the country. But, so we just kind of, you're unfortunately forced to keep contact through texting and stuff like that.
We recommend starting a podcast because
there you go.
That's literally what we did.
And
everybody
it helps. So there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's generally, I'm fortunate that a few of the guys still live around here. Patrick Patrick's my neighbor on virtually everything I did as a pro at special teams. So on the kickoffs, I'm the L3. Patty is the L2. So he's right next to me on punt team. I'm the guard. Pat's the tackle. So Pat and I were kind of like, I don't know, my wingman or whatever, something like that. And just about everything we did, we were always alongside one another, coordinated really well together. So Patty still lives down here in Rhode Island. I think he's a Lincoln guy. So I do see him some, wish saw more. Joe Andrews, he's local. Copen has got his place down in in East Greenwich, he opened up that Line Cider Brewing place. So
that's
he's
right, yeah.
incredibly busy with that. Yeah, Cope isn't doing as much media anymore. So he dipped his toe in that, did for a few years of media, but he's really involved in that brewery, and it sounds like it's pretty badass. I actually physically haven't been down there, but I've gotten cases of his stuff. It's really good. So highly recommend it if anyone's going down there. Cope's got his hands on that stuff. But yeah, Russ Hochstein. Russ Hochstein is a Nebraska kid.
Yeah.
Went to the University of Nebraska and grew up in Hardington, which is a town not too far from where I was in Sioux City. But Hochstein is, I'd say Russ is kind of the preeminent example of what happens to a lot of guys in the NFL. You go to your host city, or the city that you kind of grew up in, you settle there. Russ is 2 towns away, and I see Russ once or twice a year. And he's a great dude. We get along really well. Our families get along great. But you just end up. I live in Rentham, and I basically see Rentham people now.
Yep.
So it sucks. Like K Falk was here for years, but then now he's moved back down to Louisiana.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I think Fourier is obviously doing radio, so he's local.
Yeah.
Who else is still here?
Wiggins.
It's kind of it,
too,
and
right?
Wiggy's still here. Yeah, obviously he and I worked for years together on Nesson, but now he's doing all radio and no TV anymore. So, all those names that I mentioned, we're all around here, but we're all kind of live in different towns. We see each other a little, but not a lot. Brewski's obviously here. Brew is down in Bristol a few days a week, but he lives in North Attleboro, so he's not too far away. So, honestly, even though you're here-ish, I think we talk through text messages more than we do in person, which is, I think, just more life.
I think that's a common thing.
So, we have to ask the obvious question of do you have the phone number for Troy Brown?
Troy Brown,
he's our guy.
Were, because we are the Browns. We were discussing this last night. We're going to ask you, and then we got a discussion. Is Troy Brown the type of guy that actually has a cell phone? Because he strikes me like he may not.
Yeah, I definitely am not going to be able to give that one out. Yes, he has a cell phone. Yeah.
Like how early was he on the iPod train?
Ooh, I don't remember. So I have to be deliberate here, and so the groups don't live together necessarily. So that my whole thing was the linebacker group. Sometimes D-line would go in with us as well. Maybe tight ends, because we're like I think we're called what do they say? Lightweights, middleweights, heavies, or something like that. So I think we're always in the middle group. So the receivers and maybe the running backs and the DBs and stuff, they all work out together. Quarterbacks are with them. And then the middleweight stuff, which is us, linebackers and maybe the D-line. Now, D-line's more heavy. So mostly linebackers and tight ends and maybe the fullbacks or whatever, we work out together. So whatever music Troy's listening to, we're probably not in lifting groups very often. So it's more your body type guys, us middles.
He was probably listening to classical.
He's from went to school in West Virginia. Yeah. I don't know Troy's musical taste necessarily. I can't say.
Foiled. Oh, Greg, you wanted to ask about Brian Cox, didn't you?
Yeah, just from watching all the games in 01, he's like one guy that stood out as someone that it didn't jump to mind looking back, but when we actually go through watching the games, you're like, wow, Brian Cox is electric. Just from a personality standpoint and from a play standpoint too. So
yeah, he had a really interesting role on that team, and something that Brian wasn't there in 2000. The 2000 team was a team that was 5-11, and I don't know what the exact number was, maybe half. It seemed like half. Maybe it wasn't quite that dramatic, but there was a real house clean from between 2000 and 2001. So Cox was one of those new offseason free agents in the 01 crew. Roman Pfeiffer was the other one. So Fife is a stud, really just a tremendous pro. Really lucky to have played with him all those years. But Fife came in and Cox came in, and those are kind of the two new additions to the linebacker room. And Andy Katzenmoyer had those neck problems. So Andy was having surgeries and his career was ending. It was kind of all happened around that same time. Cox was coming in as Andy was kind of going out. And I believe Ted Johnson, he's, obviously a really good player for the organization for years, but TJ had I think it was his bicep thing then at the time. I
Yeah,
don't
he was
remember,
hurt.
but he was.
I thought they said it was a back thing.
He was a little
maybe?
bit.
Is that
Maybe,
right?
yeah. He was a little banged up at the
Yeah.
time Cox came in, so it was timely that Brian could pop in and play Mike linebacker. And that was at the days before Brewski was a Mike. Brewski was more of a Will, in
Mhm.
other words, weak side linebacker. So your Mike is traditionally your big hammer guy, and Cox is tall. I think we're about the same height, 6'4", 6'5" type guy. But Brian was heavy. Like he was like what I weigh now, unfortunately. But he was like he was like 260 type, and I was more of a 250s type. But Cox was just one of the thickest on contact, heaviest hitters, at least to the linebacker that I'd ever really been around. And the crazy part is Brian was pretty shitty in the weight room, and I joke at that because he's such an absolute animal on the field,
Yeah.
which was always a good reminder that it's not just the weightlifter guys that necessarily hit the hardest or play the best or anything like that. And Cox is a preeminent example of that. He was really poor at things like bench press and things like that, which you wouldn't expect because he was an absolute assassin on the field. But the reason I said his role was unique is Brian was kind of like the much older vet when he was brought in 01, and he was kind of a speed dial to the front office kind of guy. Like Bill would have him in, you could tell a lot to how are things in the locker room, and he was sort of meant to be kind of the go between and enforcer a little bit, and so Brian and I actually had a little tension because I'd gotten in trouble for a couple. I had 2 personal fouls in one game against the Broncos early.
Oh yeah.
And
Cox had that.
Coach had laid into me in post game, and then Cox said something to me in the locker room, and we didn't get to blows, but it was tense between he and I. And I'm telling you this because I love Brian. He's a great guy, and that we were tense then, and because he was the sort of the older guy towing the line of the coaches, and I was the just leave me the fuck alone guy. I'm trying so hard to do my job here. I'm not trying to fuck up. It's just I had a couple bad calls. But anyway, so it's funny because then as I grow and become a vet, and then Cox moves into coaching, Brian was my coach. So he was in New York when I was in New York. So Cox was brought down there with Mangini. So it was funny because that one year Cox was, the hit he has against Indianapolis that really turned the tide of that game. One of the big blow up shots over the middle. And, Cox was just such a stud for that early group of us, an emotional leader kind of guy. But he was also, I think one of the biggest lessons I got from Brian was his toughness, and just that he played with one of the worst injuries I've ever seen. He basically had a broken foot.
Yeah.
Now, when you break your foot, you can't fucking run. And he would put, like you'll see offensive linemen, they'll do that like club thing where they put the giant club on a hand, and maybe it's even a closed fist, and they don't have fingers, and they're able to play a semblance of their normal game. Cox did that with a foot. And like I've never seen that before. Like he's getting it shot up. If you look at the way he had it taped, his foot was like a club foot. Like he had so much tape on his ankle, and or foot. I don't know exactly where the break was, but he had a break somewhere there down in his foot. And he was so big, in the mid-season and late season with us, but he wasn't really healthy, yet played through that thing through the playoffs. And if I recall, I don't think he had much of a role in the Super Bowl. I think by then it was a little more reduced because he was so fucked up physically. But I just remember, I went through some things later in my career. I shredded my toe. I had a sesamoid tear, basically like, when someone has an ACL reconstruction, I kind of had one of those for my foot. Like I absolutely shredded my foot, and I used to have to take a pair of shoes and I'd get a new pair of shoes for each game and have to cut a little X out of the side so my sesamoid joint could stick out the side of my shoe. Whoa. Like because there's not enough room in the shoe for width. Like I had a fucked up toe. Like I basically shouldn't have been out there. Was getting it shot up and was just limping along. But I always remember, I like thinking, okay, Brian played with his broken. I've got a stress fracture. I've got a badly dislocated toe. I can barely walk. But I do remember as an older playing going, okay, fucking Brian got out there, and B. Cox went out and played on a broken foot. And I was similarly limited. You could tell B. Cox was limited too. But his whole thing was off the ball, middle linebacker by that point. He's like, I can still take 3 hard strides and hit the shit out of the guard in front of me. I can't cover anyone at this juncture. I'm not going to be able to pass rush. But what can I still do with my body limited this way? And always was a good example for me because I remember he figured it out. He played through the pain, take what you got to take to get out there. And I had a very similar situation to that later in my career that I had to deal with. And I always kind of thought back to how Cox was a little bit inspiring that way. But yeah, no, he was an important guy in that 01 run, because he was a very emotional leader, and he dealt with a lot to get to game day himself. And his role kind of ebbed and flowed like a lot of guys have happened. But you know, I was glad I got to play with him there. And even though there was a little tension early on, and he got to be my coach later on, it ended up being a guy that I really respected.
Yeah, because I remember, I think he got, it was like a chop block or something against the Broncos is how he broke it, because he was all fired
ended
up.
up kind of swinging on the guy because he just dove at his feet. I absolutely remember that. It was in the Broncos game. You're right.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yep.
But then he came back like 5 weeks later, and we were talking about it. We had no idea how that was
That's
possible.
right.
To come back from a
we
broken
were.
leg in 5 weeks, because he came back.
Yeah.
I think
you're right.
we were talking about
Was it
how
the
he
leg?
came back.
It might even been the leg. Yeah.
Yeah, he came back quicker from that than Terry Glenn did from his hamstring, I believe is what.
Yeah. Hamstrings suck, man. Though I hate those things. I've gone through that because it sounds like kind of a pussy injury. Oh, your hammies. But like once you torn one of those things, they never heal. And if you happen to have a job which requires you to open up and go full speed, I covered kickoffs obviously for my whole career. Hamstrings suck. Like you would. You literally rather just break the arm, break the bone, clean break, let it heal. Hamstrings are kind of those things where you get a tear in them, or they start to open up and they never heal, and you can't run. And it's just, you know, oh, my hammy. It just sounds like something that's not like as cool as like I broke my leg, or I separated my shoulder or something. Like hamstrings sound terrible. I pulled a muscle, but I don't know. I just know it. I dealt with that one season, and for my job, you have to sit over there, then run down and cover a kickoff and maybe play a few plays on defense. And it's just, when your hammies are jacked up, it's not good. So I can imagine being a guy like that, where you have to run 40 yards downfield, run back to the huddle, run 25-yard out cut, and then go down to 15. Like if your hammies are jacked up, it's a pain in the ass to say that much.
Greg, don't you have hamstring issues?
I have like knee tendonitis stuff.
Oh, that's right. I thought it was hamstring.
Yeah.
Oh, so I've been giving you crap for hamstring issues for no reason. My apologies. Greg used to play soccer at UNH, so he's the closest thing we have to a Matt Chatham in our family.
There you go. UNH is a cool school, man. I'm just I'm sad that they didn't have the hockey season got cut short, because I try to do Hockey East, hit like as many venues as we can a year, because my kid's 11-year-old kid, really good hockey player, and
nice. We
don't get up to Bees game very often, so we try to hit every venue we can in Hockey East. And UNH is one I haven't hit. I've never been up to Maine's. I don't think I haven't been to Merrimack yet either. But I think we had hit just about everything, and this was going to be the off season where we're going to tick off those last few.
Yeah.
And then the season got stunted. So.
Best laid plans, right?
There you go.
Yeah. All right. Well, Matt, we've taken plenty of your time.
Yeah, right.
So much for a 20-minute interview.
Is that accurate? I think I took your time too.
No.
I just talking.
I took the day off today because what the hell else am I going to do with PTO
Some commitment, Andy.
this year, you know?
Yeah.
I am good to go.
Oh, I'm working today.
You're on the clock right now.
Yeah.
All right. But yeah, I think I have nothing else on my list that I want to bring up.
Well, let's shout out the Razor Show, right? That's your podcast.
Yep.
Yeah. So the Razor Show on The Athletic is up, but we haven't done any episodes since the off season, Rick. So it's Jeff Howe is there now. Obviously, Jeff Howe is our lead reporter guy, and I'm the analyst. But the Razor Show has been, I think we did one episode after the Super Bowl, and it's kind of sat dormant. So if you're bored and you want to go listen to episodes from last year, they're up. But we haven't been Razor showing this off season yet. So Nick Underhill was the other writer, obviously, up with us at the Athletic, and Nick has now moved back down to New Orleans. So it's just Jeff and I right now, and we're not doing much. I'm just an in-season writer, so I'm not really doing a whole hell of a lot right now. But if you're bored and you want to go look at old stuff, it's all there archived. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, we'll throw a link in the show notes for that. Yeah. All right, Matt.
Still doing Nesson. Nesson's the plug. There you go. So Nesson is I think we're actually starting to, but this is going to be, the show will be shown later, so maybe not by then. Maybe by then we'll actually be on TV again. Who knows? But right now we're just doing the from home stuff.
Oh man, beautiful. All right. Well, thank you again, Matt. This has been fantastic. I've
Yeah,
learned
it's
a
been
lot
awesome.
myself. And,
It's
appreciate
My
you coming
pleasure.
on.
Thanks for having me,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
My pleasure. All right, now. Take
All
care,
right.
guys.
Take
All
care.
right, take it
Thanks.
easy.
Bye now.
Bye.